All right, so hello everyone. I'm Carlos Carnicero Uraballen, editor of Future is Blue, the weekly newsletter promoted by Agenda Pública and Funcas Europe. And this week we're talking about the impacts of the COVID-19 crisis in unemployment in Europe. And I'm joined by Ilaria Maselli, senior economist at the conference board. So it's great you could join us. Thank you for that. And the first question I have for you is that why is the impact of COVID-19 crisis in labor markets so unequal in different European countries? So what's the main reason behind that?
So to be honest, Carlos, I wouldn't think that would be the biggest point of what we see in the numbers so far, to be honest. So because what we saw is actually the fact that unemployment is not increasing that much in March and April. So we don't have data for May yet, but in March and April, we've seen unemployment increasing, but all in all, I would say a very limited amount, especially if you consider and if we compare to what was going on in the United States, where basically the unemployment rate went in a couple of months from 4% to close to 20%. And here, on average, in the euro area, we're still, basically we went from 7 point something to 7 point something. And there is a precise reason for that. And that's the fact that in many European countries, the adjustment to the shock until now, it's happening through hours worked. So people are working fewer hours, but still they have their jobs. Now, doesn't mean that this will stay forever, because at some point unemployment will increase in Europe as well. But I would say that this is actually the biggest fact that I see when I look at the data, is really the fact that the adjustment is happening through hours.
Okay, but maybe this is also because there are some short-term arrangements so that people have some kind of protection, temporary protection, while the economy is not frozen anymore. Let's say the economy starts, and these people, these protection mechanisms will be dropped, I imagine. But I wonder whether we're going to see more unemployment now that, you know, at the moment you leave those measures, and those workers that were temporarily protected, if they lose this protection and the economy is not doing so well, I fear that could be a rise. So do you see a threat here when governments lift those measures and the economy is not yet recovering?
Of course, because what is going to happen is that the GDP, the economy will shrink. So we are talking about at euro area level of a contraction for this year in the range of -7%, which is a huge contraction, of course. So in a smaller economy, there will also be fewer people working. But what happens in every crisis, not only now, is that unemployment reacts later. So first there is a contraction in the numbers, and then the labor market. Then you see the numbers changing in the labor market as well. So this is what we're going to observe in the next months. That of course now more or less every country has some forms of short-term unemployment system in place, and we see that they are being used at a huge rate, something we've never seen so far. Like in France, for example, almost half of workers are on the chômage partiel system. In Germany, 25%. In Italy, something similar. But indeed, as I was saying, a lot of these workers, and we don't have data on that, but a lot of workers are on the system for some days a week, for some hours per week, not full time. But yes, as you said, once these exceptional measures are lifted, then we will see an increase in unemployment. And coming back to your point on inequality, what we saw in the US already is that indeed the way unemployment is increased in the US is very unequal, because some categories have higher unemployment rate now. And I'm talking, for example, about people with less education or minorities, young people. So for all these categories, the unemployment rate right now is higher than the average, whereas other people with higher education or men in the middle-aged men are more protected so far from the shock.
And especially, I guess that those sectors and those workers prepared for telework and with the right skills for telework are more protected than those services and workers that they really need to have a physical engagement of some kind. Is that the case?
Yes, of course. I would say not only workers that are able, but also companies. A lot of companies so far have been very reluctant to allow people in Europe to telework. There are some, you can see a lot of evidence if you look at your friends in Brussels of people that are teleworking now for the first time, and not because they're not able to telework, but just because companies have been often reluctant and didn't trust their workers that would just perform as well as they would do in an office. And now, this taboo is coming down because, everyone was put into this situation, and in a way or another, it worked. But yes, indeed, there are jobs that you cannot telework. If you're a waiter in a restaurant, you're not going to do it from home, of course. And these workers are going. I mean, unemployment will of course increase for those industries that are affected by social distancing measures.
So I put myself in those younger generations that are entering the labor market right now, and I would be quite concerned. The situation is, as you said, the impact on unemployment is not yet fully developed. So it's going to get worse probably. And so what can we do to help those younger generations that they're going to start working now, they're going to start looking for a job, and the prospects are so bad?
Look, I don't think there is an easy answer to this. And indeed, it's for those that, for example, are graduating from school or from university this year, it's really hard because there's going to be fewer vacancies, and therefore, the competition for the few jobs that will open and will be much higher. So it's definitely not an easy situation. What we saw in the past crisis is that a lot of people were staying a little bit longer in education. But of course, this is not always an option. I mean, okay, in some cases, it's a good idea to continue growing your human capital, but some people might not have that possibility because they simply need to work. And this will of course affect the younger generation because they will have less good working condition, for example. It will be, overall, the labor market situation will deteriorate. And of course, as I said, younger people are one of the weak categories, and it will deteriorate for them even more. So it's really not easy. But I would say also that perhaps our generation, I don't know how old are you, but we're probably the same age, and our generation
I'm very young. I'm very young.
Of course. But our generation suffered even more in the sense that those that entered the labor market 10 years ago, or a little bit more than 10 years ago, are currently facing the third recession in Europe. So there was a recession in 2009, there was a recession in 2011, and now again, we see the third recession in a bit more than a decade. And this is something that we will carry forward in our working experience and in our minds.
Absolutely. I want to ask you a final question. We've been talking about robots for a while, and whether robotization can challenge the so many jobs and can put at risk so many jobs in Europe. And now we have the pandemic, and we're going to see, as we said, some worse effects in the next month. So how do you see Europe's labor market prepared, equipped to deal with the challenge of robots, the challenge of the post-pandemic situation? What's your view on that?
It's of course hard to make predictions, especially when they're recorded. So it's hard to say. I have the feeling everyone was talking about AI until March 7, and then nobody is talking about AI anymore. But in general, I think we shouldn't necessarily look at technology as a threat, because the experience with past technology has always been that at the end, more people were in employment than before this revolution happened. So, and there's always been a shift, from one sector to the other. So perhaps if we think about technological change and what problems can create in the labor market, we should think about not the overall effect, which is most likely positive, but try to understand which categories are at risk, because we saw that transition can be painful for a group of people, even though for the overall society is beneficial. So I would say that this should be the way to look at it.
All right, thank you. So Ilaria Maselli, thank you for joining our Future is Blue Talks, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you for having me. Bye,
All
Carlos.
right. Thank you.